Hello everyone, let's start with our workshop on the techniques of how to write a script for a short fiction film. Now, before getting into the core of the matter, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Azzedine El-Wafi. I'm a film critic and a writer, and I'm very pleased to be with you along these 45 coming minutes, and we would like to get into this workshop along many stations that make or what are supposed to make a real script, what is written by a professional, and maybe even for advanced beginners, if you want to say. For the moment, I would like to introduce a very general introduction about script writing. What is a script? What is it made of? Who can be a script writer? For what purposes? Generally speaking, producers make a difference between a craft and the art of writing a script. Because when talking about a craft, it means the tools that you use in your writings, either in reshuffling your story or rewriting the scenes or getting the distance from what you have been doing. Now, if you take an example of a short film and try to reconstruct it from the ground, for example, departing from the idea, character, structure, and style, then you have to, for example, take that example of Stutterer, a short film written and directed by Benjamin Cleary. So in this film you have the embodiment, you have a dramatic structure that might help you to reconstruct your character, see how the action is flowing, and so on. When a scene turns a story, it creates a certain change in the characters, and that change has to be maintained to prove the moral, the philosophical, and the ethical change of the characters. Otherwise, the audience will be fed up and leave. The characters' beliefs and goals must be challenged and attacked throughout the course of the story. The audience cares about the story because they care about the characters you create. So what characters are to be flat or rounded? Of course, your script has to maintain certain continuity, certain logics, so it has to be prepared in advance, and you got to have a sort of roadmap either on the paper or at least in your mind, because otherwise you might get lost and not maintain the rhythm that should be in the scenes and link the scenes together. For example, you might choose a non-linear way of narrating your story, and it could be derivative, but some cinematographers might do that, but you have to be very, very, very professional to do it. For example, sometimes Tarantino does it in his film on the Pulp Fiction.
Can you believe that?
Well, I mean, at the time I was told it sounded reasonable.
Marsalis throwing Tony out of a 4-story window or massaging my feet seem reasonable?
No, it seemed excessive, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. I mean, I understand that Marsalis is very, very protective of you.
A husband being protective of his wife is one thing. Husband almost killing another man for touching his wife's feet is something else.
But did it happen?
Only thing Antoine ever touched in mine was my hand when he shook it. At my wedding.
Really?
Truth is, nobody knows why Marsalis threw Tony out of that 4-story window except Marsalis and Tony.
It's really a question of finding the most suitable order for releasing information to the audience and not feeling any responsibility to do it chronologically, just like we don't in life. So the fact of giving details and information to the audience little by little, you have to control it. Otherwise, the audience could have a lot of information and not be in the position to be very curious and know more about your characters and story. The question has to be what happens in the scene that changes the story and moves it forward. Remembering this simple question can help you kill many unnecessary scenes. A lot of writers may have some characters, but they have no reason to be there or no motivation, so they just walk around the scene without having any real motive to make the story advance ahead. So all scenes should be linked, as I said, together. The other question should be when writers try to write a scene, many times they have to keep in mind how my characters are presented in the scene and what is the function of the scene related to what precedes it and what comes later. Sometimes we think we need a fixed certain scene when in reality the problem is elsewhere. Now let's look at some other fragments. Then you can start analyzing the scene to make the scene. When you're writing a scene, there are a couple of questions you have to ask. What do the characters want? What is the specific problem in the scene? What creates the scene conflict? What do the characters do to try to get over what in order to achieve what they want? Now, in every scene there should be a problem, and the problem leads to conflict. If you don't have a conflict, then there is a problem with your scene. It should be stated right now that a short film isn't condensed feature film, and the writers and the directors who are reluctant to accept that invariably fail. The key to writing a short film is to keep it as simple as I said before. So it's just not possible to squeeze a feature film idea or particularly complex idea into a short format and do it justice. So it's a bit like trying to squeeze a novel or something into a short story. They are different animals. Now, if we would like to come back to the film Stutters, we have to find the main idea, and finding that idea could be a person, could be a sentence in a dialogue, it could be something, both of them, but the story is about a man who stutters. So there I have my concept, and my story will develop later on. Now, all the building that should take of our main character, what they believe in, what their preoccupations are, because a short film needs philosophical, ethical, and moral dilemmas. And according to what my characters believe, they will act and react. And that, by the way, I'm going to get involved in their actions and the reactions according to the principles they maintain and the drawbacks they have in their life. One character needs to make the story advance ahead. Now, you should have one main core idea. So it's noted that there are numerous types and successful short stories of films that are sometimes could be experimental, sometimes metaphorical, or even anti-structure, as we have said. They don't follow one linear narration. These films don't follow any conventional narrative or structure.
When you little scamps get together, you're worse than a sewing circle.
Ladies and gentlemen, now the moment you've all been waiting for. It's a world-famous Jack Rabbit Slim's Twist Contest. Now this is where one lucky couple will win this handsome trophy that Marilyn here is holding. Now, who will be our first contestants?
Right here. Want to dance?
No.
No, 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 no. I do believe Marcellus, my husband, your boss, told you to take me out and do whatever I wanted. And now I want...
So that is absolutely cool, but whether you are exploring a heady concept of telling a conventional story with the first act, the second act, and third act, or your screenplay needs to consist of one core idea, and everything needs to serve that main idea, every action, every image, every line of dialogue. There is no time to develop an elaborate plot, a raft of characters and lengthy setups and leave them away, because you have to finish your draft. You have to do it. And you simply will not have time to explore the backstory. It's also best to avoid all subplots and numerous characters and multi-protagonists and expensive set pieces, story that's set in very luxurious places. Sometimes you have to shoot in different time periods. Sometimes you may choose different countries, or sometimes it could be even difficult for you to choose between two far cities.
It was a teenage wedding and the old folks wished them well. You could see that Pierre did truly love the mademoiselle. And now the young monsieur and madame have rung the chapel bell. C'est la vie, say the old folks, it goes to show you never can tell. They furnished off an apartment with a two-room robot sale. The coolerator was crammed with TV dinners and gin.
But the main important thing I guess is that you concentrate on your story. You know what is your story about. Now there are some questions, a big question that you have to ask yourself while making decisions. For example, what is the main core of the idea? What is my story about? Who is it about? It means who is the protagonist, who is to go and taking the actions, because story and protagonist go together. He's the speaker, he's the personification, he's somebody who embodies the ideas and the action. So what is the genre and the style of my screenplay? Who and what is giving the protagonist grief, and it makes him real with flesh and bone, as they say. The antagonist also should be equal him in energy, in power, in physical capacity. Otherwise, your protagonist might look weak. Now, what is the question of my story is also related to who narrates the story concerning the POV. It means the point of view. Is the story told from the point of view of an insect? It could be a child, it could be an animal, it could be nature. Now, to make a difference between story and plot. Now, the plot is what happens in my story. The structure is how does it happen, and what is the content of my story. Now, another important thing is what is the theme of my story. Many people get lost when you ask them what is the theme of your story. The theme can be developed gradually. It means sometimes you might not be aware from the beginning. You have very ambiguous idea about what your character is about, and does the plot really convey through the images what you wanna share with people. So this story is about something and somebody who is going to the train, who is going to make it move on, and it should be about something, but something else should happen to block and hinder, and it should be a sort of barrier against the wish and the want of your protagonist. Now, talking about the protagonist, always you should also ask yourself, is the protagonist, does he have any story behind him? How is he up to the level to be my central character.
He writes, "The designing principle is what organizes the story as a whole. It is the internal logic of the story, what makes the parts hang together organically so that the story becomes greater than the sum of its parts. It is what makes the story original." Essentially, the designing principle is how you choose to tell your story.
The character and the story should be hand in hand. And did he have any difficulties in his life? And there might be not necessarily be human. I mean, he should have what we call a dramatic flaw, something that makes him weak, something that doesn't give him enough confidence in himself. And that, in that way, the audience might show some sympathy for your character and show him and follow him. Now, the antagonist is the balance that gives the protagonist real shape.
But when Pierre found work, the little money coming worked out well. C'est la vie, say the old folks. It goes to show you never can tell. They had a hi-fi phone, oh boy, did they let it blast. 700 little records, all rock, rhythm, and jazz. But when the sun went down, the rapid tempo of the music fell. C'est la vie, say the old folks. It goes to show you never can tell.
So once you know your protagonist and you have an idea about the genre that you are writing in, then what is stopping him? Or simply, who or what is my antagonist? So you have to make a choice. And even, for example, you might make a sort of biography about both of them. You know what their likes, what are their dislikes, the shape, the physical shape, the intellectual matters that happen, that are important to them. Do they get up very early? Do they have any phobia? Do they have any sexual tendencies or not? Now, when you come gradually writing all that, another question should be asked about the genre of your film, because there is something about crashing experimentation or creativity, but more as a reminder of self, as long as you proceed. For example, the short play your short screenplay should be about something amusing, about something moving, something shocking to the audience.
What makes Memento memorable is the way the story is told. The plot of the film is often described as telling the story backwards, in reverse chronological order, so that the film begins at the end of the story and ends at the beginning. But in truth, it's actually more complicated than this, and what Christopher Nolan was able to pull off is more impressive than simply telling a story backwards. So today I want to look at how the decision to use reverse chronological order was more than a simple gimmick, to examine how he holds the audience's attention while telling them a story where they almost never know what's going on, and analyze how he was able to create a satisfying linear narrative while including so many non-linear components.
Then that will define the tone and the style at the same time. So when you come to the central question that you have been asking yourself repeatedly, what is the question that drives the action of the story? Now, some sample questions might be, for example, if you have a boy who would like to meet his girlfriend, will the boy win the girl? Will the boy ever meet his hero? This question of the film should be answered in some way, either by the second act or by the conclusion. I mean, before you make your final draft. Even if necessary, sometimes the question might be ambiguous, but the question of a short film can be tiny and very simple. Now, when we come to the question of plot, for example, you might not advocate for one main sequence of events. For example, you might choose one event instead of another. You might censor yourself. You might possibly ask, what will happen to my character given this particular situation? What could he or she possibly do? What would I do if I were him in that position? And then that might happen as a result of his action and reaction, because the more your character is involved or getting a part, defines his psychological power. Now, if we want to go back to our story of Stuttered, our main character name is Greenwood, and his external problem is that he stuttered. So, what does he believe about his stutter that holds him back in life? But also, what does he want? Greenwood wants a deep, intimate relation with his girlfriend, with someone at least at the beginning. So he's trying to find that person who believes in him. What beliefs does, and what does he want? He wants a deep, intimate relation. So that's his internal problem, but there's also an external obstacle. So Greenwood believed that his stutter will stop him from having any relation with whoever. He feels disconnected from the world. He's allowing in self-pity. So the central character has a problem. That's the main central idea. And this central character has to overcome some obstacle in order to accept himself. So by this way, he's trying to find and get over that obstacle. We can begin building the other characters. For example, it might be his mother, or it could be his father, and his wish to have a deep, intimate relationship with some girl or girl called Ellie is going to prove whether, to what extent he can overcome that flaw by getting into contact with the girl and finding some way to introduce himself. So he doesn't accept himself. So he feels honesty, he feels self-pity. So the other one, Ellie, has to accept herself and willing to be honest and doesn't feel self-pity, so as to show some sympathy for him. Now, when you are trying to reconstruct the plot, and it's a stage that is very strategic. So when you are drafting and redrafting, you may realize that certain plot points and actions don't fit into the global structure of what you have chosen to illustrate as a theme, and might distract the audience, or you doesn't mean in fact what you want to tell. So at this point you would change the plot point and find more satisfying events and action that go in fact in parallel with what you are hopefully trying to say. Now, while working on the dramatic structure, you have also to consider the thematic structures, because they go hand in hand. Now, for example, a very simple story, let's say it's a man who goes to extreme lengths in order to keep his dog. So the underlying meaning of the story, known as the theme, is more difficult to identify, but it infuses the characters and the emotional core and plot. The theme can even be revealed in images and symbolism and setting. So in an idea about the man trying to keep his dog, the theme might be loneliness, it might be the desire to be loved, it might be the proof to defy yourself, it might be a care for animal.
Memory loss seeks revenge on the person who killed his wife. This premise is fine on its own, and probably enough to pique one's interest.
Now, it could even be about the ridiculous nature of bureaucracy, because cops or someone doesn't allow him to keep his dog in the district because neighbors claim something about it. And once you have identified what your story is about on a deeper level, it can help you to improve the piece and give it a thematic unity, and doing that, of course, with images and symbols and using music and motifs and location. All those might and should reflect the theme. Now, of course, when we are talking about drafting and redrafting, it's a non-continuous process. It never ending. But of course, we might say that writing is endless, but it should come to an end, to a certain full stop by the end. But that rewriting is more efficient in matters of conveying information, as I said, because we are short in time, and any unnecessary business that doesn't propel the story forward isn't necessary to the story. It should be avoided categorically. For example, people driving and walking from one place to another. If the audience doesn't need to know about that, doesn't need to see that, I mean, you have to cut it and move on. The writer is constantly being challenged to find it quicker, shorter, smarter way to convey the information. And here we have to consider the following cinematic techniques. For example, the use of images, should sound and music be integrated, what editing, maybe in your mind, you are not an editor, but you have to think in that too. What are there any recurrent motifs that should be shown again and again, to be inculcated in the mind of the spectator? And will you use any for example, voice or tonal or sound motives? For example, in this way, when we want to talk about dialogue, normally you write all the scenes, for example, interior, exterior, yard, evening or late evening, what the character are supposed to be doing, the actions and so on and so forth, in very precise and in minimal ways. And then when you write all the continuous dialogue, what you call in French continuité dialoguée, then you can move to what is said by your character, I mean to the dialogue. That's the second phase you can go. You never write a dialogue while writing the scene. And then you have to ask yourself, how can I convey the same meaning in fewer words?
Oh, Jesus, God, no.
Where's that guy? What's he doing? Take care of him. He's too late. Get it. Hey, stop. Crazy punk!
because your character, otherwise, I mean, unless you are trying to convince and show a talkative person who talks much, otherwise there is no need for making your characters talk a lot. It's the same thing being said twice, because you have to read and read. Can lies be replaced with an action that conveys the same meaning? Is the dialogue telling us something we can see? Sometimes, for example, I see something, so there is no need to mention it, because what is seen shouldn't be said. Is verbal conflict moving the story forward, or revealing something that what is shown doesn't show about the character? And if not, is there any way of doing it? Now, is the exposition natural or clumsy? I mean, the setup. Is the dialogue true to the type of character? Does it suit him? For example, a burglar wouldn't talk like a businessman. A whore wouldn't talk like a secretary. So, is your character's dialogue moving the story forward and revealing more and more about their surrounding, what they believe, what they do in their daily life? Now, normally you should always take a break and breathe also, to reevaluate your first draft, because it's very common that writers are invariably and understandably resistant to significant editing, because they have an emotional connection to that work. So how to overcome that problem and be selective? Finally, step back from the work and take some distance and have a break. Might get some oxygen into your mind before you get started again.